Good morning. Okay, if you haven't already, had it set up, pages 32, 33. Okay, we are ending our standard unit today. So just a few pieces of business for this week. We're just going to spend a couple minutes looking at this roll skeleton stuff, because I didn't spend quite enough time on it. And then I actually want to jump right into keyboard percussion instruments already today. We'll do quiz on Thursday on snare drum. I'll give you another couple days to review. That means that you guys are in pretty good shape.
Is that good in class?
Well, yeah, we'll do it in class. Okay.
Do we have a playing portion of it?
We will later in the semester. I'll combine it with probably keyboard percussion. So that. Any questions on snare drum stuff? Especially thinking about there being a quiz.
I'm guessing it's like parts of the drum with different techniques.
Well, if I told you it was on the quiz, I'm not telling you. So, you need to know the parts of the drum. You need to know about the grip. Right? You should be able to identify things that we need to change with the grip. Swings and drags, different kinds of rolls, stickings. Right. Okay, so page 32, 33. Okay, I just want to review roll skeletons for like 5 minutes or so. So when I say roll skeleton, what am I talking about?
The underlying rhythm.
Underlying rhythm that's happening while we're playing a roll, right? So when we play a roll on a snare drum, what kind of roll? What are our options for rolls? Buzz roll. Single stroke, which we don't use on the snare drum. And then the one we spent a little less time on is a double stroke roll. Okay, so buzz roll. People will also call this a multiple bounce roll, especially in like a lot of beginning books. So if you see multiple bounce roll, same thing. And in terms of notation, Kevin Wiley does do a good job of having multiple kinds of notation in this book. So on pages 32 and 33, you could say basically two kinds, right? If you kind of just look throughout the page, there's two ways he notates rolls here. What are they? They're very similar.
The one.
Yeah, so we have 16th notes with one slightly diagonal slash through the note head, or you have quarter note with three of them. And practically speaking, in real life, whatever that means, but in musical context, like in a band piece, you're not really going to see the one slash through the head, the note head, unless it's for rudimental or marching context. Okay, so if you're doing like a pet band thing, you have that, and they want double stroke rolls, and that's when you use double stroke roll anyway. Otherwise, you're typically going to see the three slashes through the note head, or the other thing you might see is a little Z, right? Have you seen this before in band music? Maybe not, because maybe you don't look at beginning percussion band music.
It's actually what I do in my free time.
Great. He does use it. Skip over to page 36, 37. Okay, so like exercise number 1 or line number 1 on page 36. You see we have the half note with a Z through the head.
Yeah.
Multiple bounce roll or buzz roll. This really only is used in, I would say, like beginning to intermediate pedagogical contexts. So like if I'm playing in an orchestra, I've never ever seen a Z written in my snare drum part in orchestral music. But it was sort of something that's developed, in the last several decades as people are thinking about pedagogy for like young musicians instead of just like, here's what Tchaikovsky thought we should write, if that makes Okay. So typically, what kind of roll skeleton do we have? Typically, what kind of underlying rhythm do we have for those rolls? 16 notes. Right. So let's play number 1 together. This is page 32. Okay, so it should sound something like this. 1 and 2, buzz, 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 2, 1 and 2, and buzz, 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 2, and buzz, 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 2, and they're still thinking 16th notes. Even during like measure 4, we have that quarter note, it should still be a 16th note rhythm underneath, but it's written for quarter note with slide. Let's do it. 1, 2, ready, go. Good, do it again. 1, 2, ready, go, and. Cool, can I see front row? 1, 2, ready, go. Cool. Okay, so if I see your arms going like this during the roll, that's a problem. It should still be in general, it should still look exactly like the same rhythm. If I'm just looking at it, it should look like you're still playing 16 notes. All we're doing is we're buzzing the strokes instead. Back row. 1, 2, ready, go. Yeah, so I see. There's nothing very wrong, this is really. Make sure the rhythm is still happening basically to a fault right now. Okay, let's actually skip over to page 36, 37, where Wiley wrote out the Z's. Buzz. We didn't really use this terminology, although you don't really need to use it, but it's helpful to know. People will also refer to these as a closed roll versus an open roll. It's just one of those things where there's like 3 names for the same thing. I'm not quizzing you on that. But closed roll is a buzz roll, and open roll is a bell circle. Okay, let's do number 1. Okay, so measures 1 and 2, notationally they look different because we have 2 beats of 16 notes, quarter note, rest, and then we have a half note, quarter note, rest. But the way our hands are moving should actually essentially look exactly the same because there are 8 16th notes and our half note, right? So our hands are moving the same way, we're just buzzing on each of those 16th note strokes in measure 2. Okay, so watch me once. 1, 2, 3, rest. Okay, so it's still da, 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 da. Let's just do the first measures. 1, 2, ready, go. Rest. Yeah. Let's do it a little faster. Deck it, go. 1, 2, ready, go. Yeah. So you can probably see how, as you go faster, it might feel harder to do, but in some sense it's easier to hear that the buzzes are connected, because there's less space for it to kind of sound like right? It starts to sound more like a continuous sustained thing, which is the point of a roll, right? Let's do the whole line. 1, 2, and go. Rest. Rest. Cool. Let me hear front row plus Elizabeth. 1, 2, ready, go. Okay, it's getting better. Back row minus Elizabeth. 1, 2, ready, go. Okay. Even if you're like, I suck at this, is the concept making sense of like we're always thinking about this rhythm still happening, we're not just like frantically squeezing the sticks and hoping for the best. Okay. Skip over to page 37. So the first line on page 37, right? This is number 5. Okay, so we have buzzes on the 8th notes. Okay, so how would we actually think about this rhythmically, just for measure 1? Yep, so we have 1, and a 2, and a 3, and a 1. Okay, so one thing we didn't really talk about, ties. Ties do weird things in percussion music, and the reality is a lot of times you actually ignore them, especially when we're talking about rolls, because really all he's trying to tell you to do is connect the roll to the next beat. He's not saying to actually not play beat 2 and beat 3. Anytime I see a roll connected to the next thing via a tie, I interpret that to mean they want the roll to sound connected, but not that they literally want us to not play a beat on beats 2 and 3. Does that make sense? I know that's kind of a weird one. Okay, so as a rhythm, measure 1 should sound like 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 1. With the buzzes on the roll skeleton now should sound like 1 and a 2 and a 1. So let's play the rhythm once, the underlying rhythm. 1, 2, go. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 1. And it's right, right, left, right, right, left, right, right, left, right. Again, 1, 2, ready, go. 1 and 2 and 3 and a 1. Now with the buzzes, still same sticking. 1, 2, ready, go. Let's hear back row minus Elizabeth. 1, 2, ready, go. Again, 2, ready, go. Good. Front row. 1, 2, ready, go. Yeah. One more time, everybody. 1, 2, ready, go. Right. Okay. Let's just do one more, and then we have to move on. Well, let's do the whole line. Let's do the whole line. Okay. Line number 5. 1, 2, ready, go. Right, right, right. Do it again and do the quarter note rest. 1, 2, ready, go. Okay, cool. Any questions on this? about the snare drum as a musical instrument or as an object? Okay. All right. Great. Now you're ready to teach snare drum to the youth of the nation. I haven't done this in the past, but I think what I'd like to do this semester is to keep doing some pad stuff over the course of the course, because I think it translates so well to everything else. I think it's worth it. Okay. So, let's shift gears to mallet percussion instruments or keyboard percussion instruments. And I'll probably have us turn around in a second. Let's just go ahead and do that now. Let's turn around so that we can see the instruments back there. And I need to get the recording. This. Does that work? Okay, I think that's going to be okay. Okay, so the plan for these instruments in general today, I just want to talk through sort of what we have in terms of instruments and the differences between these instruments. Sort of the overall knowledge we need to know about the instruments, and then there's sort of how to play them, right? The good thing in terms of playing is that the grip we learn for snare drum is going to be exactly the same as the grip we're going to play on all our mallet instruments. And when you're teaching beginning percussion, you should absolutely think about the grip being the same for all the instruments. For mallets, snare drum. So that's nice. As far as reading pitches, we all can read music, so that's good. And we're all doing class piano, right? Or have done class piano. Excuse me, so that's helpful because these instruments are honestly, in some ways, very similar to playing a piano. So the actual, here's how to play the instrument part is actually pretty straightforward. It's one of the easiest instruments to sort of just step up to and make some sort of noise on that is actually a decent sound, because it's not like a flute or a trumpet where it's actually really hard to immediately get sound, right? So that's all nice. And then we'll just talk about some of the important things specific to mallet instruments in terms of again, stickings are a thing we're going to talk about. They'll be different in the context for mallets because on snare drum we're hitting one thing, and on mallets we're hitting a variety of notes, so it changes how we think about stickings. And we also need to know sort of what kinds of mallets and implements to use. One thing is, most people say mallet instruments. I like to say keyboard percussion instruments, even though it's more of a mouthful. It's kind of a dumb distinction, but technically pretty much every percussion instrument uses mallets other than the snare drum, so I think it's kind of confusing to say mallet instruments, but most people just say mallet instruments, and that's fine. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind is, especially if you're teaching beginning band, right, and you have percussionists in your beginning band, most places, when most programs are set up, is the students will bring their own bell kit when they're in their first year learning percussion. I assume that's what a lot of schools in North Dakota do. Everywhere else in the country I've been, that's kind of the standard thing. There are good and bad things about that I want to talk about as we go through this unit. But obviously that's a little bit different than you're running a high school band program and maybe you have some of these instruments. I also know that you might not necessarily have all these instruments in your band program wherever you end up teaching. So I'm not gonna spend a bunch of time on like, here's how to play 4-mallet marimba, because that's not really going to be super useful to you. We will touch on it just ever so briefly so you kind of know it's there. Okay, should we take the covers off and reveal the instruments? Up first is the marimba. I'd like to be able to see it. So. Okay, the marimba is the instrument you are least likely to have.
Because it's expensive.
It's expensive, it's big, etc. So I'm going to give you some information about every instrument. I guess I can send this as a PDF also, since it seems like there's not really a note-taking vibe in this class. I don't know if maybe there should be a note-taking vibe. Something to think about. What's that?
I guess we'll find out when we take the quiz.
Yeah, we'll find out when we take the quiz with no notes. Okay, so the marimba, basically the pieces of information I'm going to give you about everything is like, what is the typical range? What is it made of? What do we play it with? Miscellaneous. Okay, marimbas are from 4 octaves to 5 octaves. There's too many stands in the way. I should be able to actually see. Okay, 4 octaves to 5 octaves. You're really only going to see 5-octave marimbas probably at the college level here. They're in different parts of the country. They do have a 5-octave marimba in high schools, but it's like very robust band programs with boosters and big budgets and stuff. Go to Texas, you can see that. The instrument is written in both treble and bass clef. Essentially the same range as a cello. That's probably not helpful to you since none of you are cellists, but essentially we have the bass range here, the treble range here. The instrument is written at pitch, okay? It's not a transposing instrument. All keyboard percussion instruments are written in the key of C, but some of them transpose by octave. So we'll talk about that as we get to it. Marimbas are made of wood or synthetic wood, okay? So a nice marimba like this is made of real wood, and it's made of Honduran rosewood. Specifically, all basically professional level marimbas are made of Honduran rosewood. We have another marimba in our practice room that's a little smaller. It is real wood. It's not Honduran rosewood. It's Padauk, I think, which is sort of the second most common wood used. And it's a great practice instrument. I immediately knew it was Padauk. It does not sound as good. It's sort of like using an upright piano versus a grand piano. That's like basically the difference. They're both totally fine instruments to use for things. If Professor Johnson is like gonna play, Beethoven sonata in a concert hall, he probably doesn't want to play it on an upright piano, right? Probably wants to play on a grand piano. Same idea. And honestly, the price is not nearly as different between those two things. In terms of what we play this instrument with, yarn mallets. Okay, so a variety of yarn mallets for a variety of situations. Essentially, the lower range needs softer mallets, the medium range needs more medium mallets, and the higher range needs harder mallets. Okay, the smaller the bar, but the harder the mallet we need in order to like get some sound. So this is like a soft, medium soft mallet, and it sounds nice sort of in this low range. Right, and even down here it's actually starting to get like, I could use a softer mallet and it would sound better. Okay, but if I go up here, it doesn't really sound very good, right? At the very top of the instrument. I just happened to grab 3 from the same like line of mallets, and they're different hardnesses. So a lot of companies will, make like, this is the Nancy Zeltzman line, and there are 5 hardnesses within that line, and you can get all of them, you can mix and match depending on what you need. Okay, so this is sort of like the second softest mallet in that line. This is like the medium. So as you can hear, it still sounds pretty good. This mallet's pretty played in because it's pretty old. What year were you guys born in?
Oh, 3-2.
Okay, it's younger than you. Still got that going for it. So this sounds good in the upper range. But if you try to play down here, it's okay, but it just starts to be a little too bright. Okay, marimba. Parts of the instrument for the marimba, but that is going to be essentially the same for everything. Obviously you have the frame, you have the keys or the bars. You'll hear people use those terms basically interchangeably. Usually people say bars, people say keys too. You'll notice they're different heights. The manuals are different heights. If you can't see that, check it out later. So they're not, I think I briefly talked about this with xylophone at some point this semester. They're not the same height on marimba. You're always going to see the accidentals are above. Okay. And then these things hanging underneath, these big tubes, what are these? Does anyone know what these are called? Resonators. It's kind of a deceptive title because what do you assume the resonator is going to do? Well, it's gonna resonate. What does that mean though? Does it make the sound longer? Fuller? Nah, everyone doesn't want to be wrong. It makes it louder. It doesn't make the sound longer. It makes it louder. So it should be called an amplifier. But it's called a resonator. I don't know, I think that's a weird title. Okay, marimba. Done. Next we have the xylophone. Okay, the xylophone in a lot of ways is similar to the marimba, and it's sort of like the cousin. Okay, it's also an instrument that the nicer models are made of real wood, and the less expensive or student models are either made of a worse kind of wood, but more frequently some kind of synthetic material. So we have two instruments that are in practice rooms upstairs that you all can easily access, right? I don't know if you've noticed that. One of them is a black, like all black xylophone. That's called Keylon. That was like this company Musser made a proprietary synthetic material. It was very, very, very common for a few decades. So there's like a really good chance you're gonna run into having a Keylon xylophone or even a Keylon marimba at a school at some point. What? Yeah. The nice thing about Keylon is it's very durable, right? I mean, the reality is wood is not as durable as the synthetic stuff, so especially if you're like wanting in a public school, or maybe you have a bunch of Franklin middle school boys involved, durability is clutch, okay? However, the downsides to having a Keylon or fully synthetic instrument, the Keylon has kind of been phased out for the most part. They sort of have better materials now, but you're still going to see a lot of Keylon stuff because they're still just like, it's what they bought earlier. It's very loud, and you have to be careful with what mounts you use because it just can be like piercing. Also, it is very durable, but once it starts to have issues, like once it starts to disintegrate, which I've seen on some instruments, it's really bad because what happens is that it looks like it's like splintering, and you can get splinters, but they're like, it's synthetic, so you're basically getting like basically fiberglass slivers, which if you've ever got before, like it really sucks. It's worse than a normal sliver. It doesn't come out very easily. So just a word of caution. Okay, typical range for the xylophone, this is a 4-octave instrument. They're usually 3 to 4. I would say 3.5 to 4 is most common. The xylophone's kind of the weirdest in terms of standardization because it's was the first instrument kind of in this family to get played a lot in a Western context and sort of manufactured by American companies, which means basically in the 19-teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, people were just making a bunch of weird stuff. And like, it's not bad, it's just, you know, later on in the 20th century, companies were like, we need to standardize this because it's gonna be easier, and it's gonna be easier to sell stuff if it's more standardized. So now it is, but it didn't used to be. Anyway, pretty much never gonna see a xylophone bigger than 4 octaves, 3 to 4 octaves, and typically what you're gonna see, like this is a C to C 4 octaves. I used to have a 3-octave xylophone that was F to F, and if you see a 3.5, it's either gonna be C to F or F to C. Okay. In terms of mallets for this instrument, you can't use the same thing as a marimba usually because the bars are much smaller and higher pitched. So if you try to use it's very it doesn't really sound good. You're never going to hear that in an ensemble context. So even the hardest mallet. Okay, so typically we use some kind of plastic mallet is common. Different plastic mallet. These are like, even within the realm of plastic, there's different hardnesses. So there's like softer plastic to harder plastic. These are kind of in the medium soft range. I still think these are actually like kind of hard. So the other thing you can use is like a hard rubber mallet. This is actually very hard rubber. It's gonna be a little bit less piercing. So very hard rubber. What is this one? This is like a medium rubber. Okay. Typically you're gonna use plastic or rubber. I see a lot of places where there's like one pair of xylophone mallets and they're the same ones as for the bells and they're just like rock hard plastic, and it's going to be impossible for your students to play in a way that's not like ear shattering. So just be aware of that. And then the band are like, play softer. It's like they can't play softer. That's as soft as they can play. So just giving you my perspective as someone who's not a band director but is a percussionist and like seeing a lot of different gear situations, and I know that sometimes you just have what you have and you can't always buy a bunch of stuff, but like buying like one more pair of mallets for xylophone or something is probably doable. You know, it's a $20 situation. There are also resonators, right? They're smaller. This instrument sounds 1 octave higher than written. Okay, so this is the middle C. But it's written an octave. Sorry, it sounds an octave higher than written. So this is written as middle C, but this is actually an octave higher than middle C. Okay.
Does the color of the heads coordinate with the hardness?
It doesn't, except like if you buy mallets within the same line, then sometimes like this Nancy Zelsman line, like they're color coordinated, so
it's just within the lines and
yeah.
Okay.
But like these are 3 different brands, and yeah, there's
Okay.
And it totally depends, because even like I actually mostly use this line of marimba mallets, the rather concise line, and there's like basically a 1 through 6 in hardness for these, but he wants them all the same color because he thinks it's distracting to have different color mallets. Nancy Zelsman thinks it's pretty. These are actually what these people think. I'm not like making fun of anybody's opinion. They're both like amazing players. think they're both probably overthinking it. I think audiences probably don't really notice the colors that much, but. Okay, vibraphone. Vibraphone. Where did we get the name vibraphone? It vibrates, okay? I don't want to make fun of anybody, but years ago I had somebody on a test spell it as like vibraphone. I was like, no, it's vibra. It vibrates. Vibraphone. Vibrating phone. Okay. What?
Just a chill day.
Okay, the vibraphone. In terms of range, it's almost always going to be a 3-octave instrument, okay? It's going to be an F to F instrument. One thing about the xylophone, same as marimba, separate manuals, okay? Accidentals are higher, like physically higher than white keys. Okay, vibraphone, 3 octaves. They do now manufacture 3.5 and 4-octave vibraphones. They're pretty rare, and most people don't want to play them because everyone's used to playing the same size instrument. So all of a sudden, like, you have this extra half octave or octave. The people they're useful for is like jazz musicians who are improvising a lot, but most like classical people don't want to deal with a bigger instrument unless they have to. Okay, 3 octaves for the vibraphone. The keys are the same level. Okay, there's a practical reason why they're the same level, which we'll talk about in a second, but yeah, all vibraphones have keys at the same level. I'm sure there's some exceptions somewhere, but all vibraphones have keys at the same level. It plays in the octave that it's written in. Okay, the F is basically the F below the staff in a treble clef, and the highest F is like the whatever 4th space above the treble clef. Technically, like you could put the lowest couple notes in the bass clef, right? Because they're far enough below. But nobody ever does that. I've literally never seen a vibraphone write the bass clef in my life. If you play a lot of vibraphone, which I do, it just is like, it's really nice to have it F to F because it makes it easier. It's just easier to read. It's nice to have something that's like, these are all the options and it never gets weird. Because percussionists are constantly dealing with like new notational systems or like things that are different. Or it's a 5-octave marimba, it's a 4 1/3, it's a glockenspiel with a weird range, whatever. Vibraphones are made with metal bars. If you really want to know, they're made with aluminum alloy typically, but metal is fine. The instrument has a pedal, okay? Pretty much our metallic instruments might have a pedal. Our wooden instruments don't because there's not really, they just ring for as long as the wood can resonate. The metal instruments obviously can ring much longer because metal can ring much longer. Okay, so this is with the pedal down. The pedal up. Okay, so much different sound. And obviously just like a piano, you can, so oftentimes it gets used to like articulate phrases or that sort of thing. In terms of mallets, we almost always are going to use some kind of yarn mallet on the vibraphone, which might be counterintuitive. You think metal, maybe it needs a harder mallet. But if you use like a xylophone mallet on a vibraphone, it's a very like harsh, brittle sound. So we don't use that. It's also going to damage the bars over time. Because the metal's not, it's basically too, I think this is correct, I'm not a scientist, but it's too soft basically to handle the, so if you're using some kind of yarn mallet, you'll notice the mallets I'm using right now, these are vibe mallets, look a little bit different than the marimba mallets, right? So there are sort of different kinds of yarn mallets, some that are more appropriate for marimba, some that are more appropriate for vibraphone. Okay, a lot of people will a lot of vibraphone mallets are what we call chord mallets, which is just the way they wrap it is different. It's like C-O-R-D, not C-H-O-R-D music. But essentially you're gonna see a much smaller head, right? And the bars are much smaller, and they need sort of a little different kind of attack to resonate. Okay. So again, this is more like typical of a marimba mallet. This is more typical of a vibraphone mallet. We have resonators on the vibraphone, and are we close enough to the power source? Vibraphones have a motor, which is an interesting thing, which you don't normally use unless the composer asks for it, which most of them don't. And also, it's probably broken. Like this one's not, I know, because I've used it, but just in general, it's probably broken. Like I always used to joke about this with classes, and they're like, ha ha ha, and then we wheel in all the vibraphones at like a major university, and half of them are broken. Okay, it's usually broken. It's probably broken. You might not have it at all. And it's not that big of a deal. I will do it because it does sound, it is like a distinctly different sound. And it's kind of cool to hear.
Have you ever played with a motor on in band or orchestra?
Yes, I have. Not very many times, but.
I've never seen a piece like that, so I was curious.
So you have to plug it in, and then there's just an on-off switch underneath the instrument, or like right here, and then you can adjust the speed of. Basically, in the resonators, we can maybe look at this next time. In the resonators, there's a fan spinning.
Yeah.
So this is like at the slow speed. And then you can. Too fast, wow, out of control. It's probably gonna break. Jazzy stuff. So, I put a watch on today, because we don't have a clock. But as we were about to start class, I was like, okay, it's 8 o'clock. My watch said 9:10, so that was not helpful. I fixed it, so I think we're good. So I think it's 8:47. Okay, good. One thing to think about with these instruments, we have more, but just one thing to think about, is where they come from. Okay, so the vibraphone is basically a really distinctly American 20th century invention. And it was invented to play basically jazz. It's a little more complicated than that, but like basically people use it for jazz. The xylophone and the marimba are instruments that we've now standardized and codified in Western music, but they both come from ethnic traditions. They both are instruments we've essentially appropriated from different indigenous music traditions and turned into like a standard Western instrument. So you'll see marimba in Guatemala and Mexico, and you'll see xylophones in different parts of Africa, different parts of South America, and it's complicated. Basically, is what I would say. I don't think we need to like immediately stop playing the instrument because it's essentially an appropriated thing, but I also think it's important to like realize that it's something we adapted from another culture, like started to use for a different purpose in a different context. And now they're sort of all like mashed up together in the like band section, band percussion section, or orchestra percussion section, and that goes for all of the instruments we play, really, right? Like we talked about the snare drum. There's an instrument from war. The bass drum is like an instrument of war. If you go to cymbals and triangle, those are like distinctly from a Turkish tradition. Like you have what's called Janissary music, Turkish thing. The Turks are the people who essentially invented the cymbal, at least like the type of cymbal we're playing, have been manufacturing it for hundreds of years. The two biggest cymbal manufacturers are still Turkish families. They're actually brothers who are rivals. Zildjian and Sabian, if you don't know this, they're both Zildjian brothers, but Sabian was like the one brother broke off because he hated the other brother. You know, there was a fight in the lobby and someone drove their car through a plant or something. Anyway, so it's just interesting to think about these, like where these different things come from and what that means. I certainly don't have any answers, but we should acknowledge it at least. Okay, we're out of time. On Thursday, we'll talk about the glockenspiel and chimes, and then we'll do some playing, and we'll do our quiz. So hopefully we can get through all of that. I don't think the quiz is going to take a tremendous amount of time. It's not super long, but do please review.